Hello, class. Welcome to another introduction to the Middle East. Class, I hope you enjoyed our last lesson. Today we're going to talk about Jordan, one of my favorite countries. And I think that as we go through the video, you'll see why I feel passionate about, I know I feel passionate about all the countries in the Middle East, but this one especially is dear to my heart for lots of reasons. And you'll see why by the time we get to the end, especially because of the king and the queen that live there. And so, but let's go on, let's go forward. And in our pre-class question, I asked you to, what was the most intriguing thing you learned from geography now? And I thought that he did an excellent job in explaining the geography and the culture and the history and the lay of the land in a way that was really insightful. And I've watched it, quite a few different ones that he has created. I don't know his name, whoever he is, but it's Geography Now is the name of it. But the one on Jordan, I thought, is probably one of the best. Well, to start out today, I'm going to start. So I've read the biography of a couple of biographies, Queen Noor biography. Oh, I don't even have it with me, but the biography of King Abdullah, who's the present day king. And I've read the biography of King Hussein. And Queen Rania needs to make one, just letting you know. But here's how he introduced his book, and I want to introduce my lesson. If you want to understand where you're going, it helps to know where you come from. And to understand the situation that Jordan finds himself in today, you really have to look at where they've been and where they're at today. And I've created a timeline that we'll be going through throughout this lesson. But let's just begin. It kind of all started when the Ottoman Empire kind of took its last breath toward the end of World War I, and the Arabs began following new nationalist leaders. And one of the leaders that was living in Mecca in the Hijaz was Sharif Hussein bin Ali. He was the Sharif of Mecca, and that is a painting of him right there. And one of the questions I ask you is, what did that treaty do with all the land that the British promised? Remember that he met with the British leaders in Cairo, McMahon, and I want to say Lord Kitchener, but it's slipping my mind, but definitely McMahon. And they promised him land in return that he would push out the Ottomans. And of course, the British did not keep their promise, because at the same time, in the two people, Sykes and Picot, were carving up a post-World War I Ottoman Empire, and Sharif would not get everything that they had promised to him. Well, he had four sons. He had Ali, who was the king of Hijaz in Saudi Arabia, and he had Faisal, king of Syria, then in Iraq, and then who eventually will become the king of Iraq. And then Abdullah will become the king of Jordan, was Transjordan. He'll change the name of it, I want to say in about 1949, to Jordan. And then Zaid, who will help his brother in Iraq. And if you've watched Lawrence of Arabia, Alec Guinness will play Faisal in Lawrence of Arabia. And speaking of Lawrence of Arabia, much of it was filmed in Jordan. In fact, the result though of the Arab revolt was that the Arabs will push out, the Jordanians are the ones that will push out the Ottomans. They will attack from one way. I want to say even Saud in Saudi Arabia will attack as well. But this is where British officer T.E. Lawrence comes in, and he meets with Abdullah and Faisal, and he will help fight the Ottomans. In fact, one of the great battles in the Middle East was at Aqaba, which is it's a port that is in Jordan down on the Red Sea. I want to show you this little interesting scene right here. Yeah, so that is an interesting, I'm not sure where that's filmed, but definitely the scene before it with the airplane is filmed in Jordan. Now, King Abdullah, I should back up here and say King Abdullah, who is the present day king, King Abdullah II. His great uncle, Prince Faisal, was played in the movie, and he's the one that I was showing you, Alec Guinness. And King Abdullah, the present day king, said that my mom and my dad were on the hillside as they were filming this scene where the Turkish bomber attacks Faisal's camp while en route to Damascus. By the way, this was filmed in 1962. And when the word spread that my father, King Hussein, was there, the Bedouin extras just left the set. They rushed up to meet my father, shouting their loyalty. As planes flew over, it was interesting though, as the planes were flying over, a very old man turned to my father and said, "Sir, that's not the way it happened. I was a child in the camp and the planes came from the other direction." Well, King Hussein kept getting so many of the Bedouins coming and honoring him. They were so grateful he was there. Finally, after the visit, the production crew politely asked King Hussein not to visit the set again. And so here, now King Abdullah, he knew Lawrence of Arabia. And if you've watched the movie, it makes Lawrence of Arabia to be a hero. But King Abdullah says he was kind of a strange character. He was eager to mold to people to suit his interests. In fact, he said, he tried to influence me against my own father. And King Abdullah I said, he had a higher opinion of Winston Churchill than he ever did of Lawrence of Arabia. Well, in 1922, the British will divide Palestine in 1922. They'll give King Abdullah a little area called Transjordan, today called Jordan. And then after the Jewish terrorists from the Stern, so Jewish immigrants are coming, the Aliyah, they're all coming back to the Holy Land. And they start to push out some of the Palestinians that are living there. Eventually we'll push out many, hundreds of thousands. But a group called the Stern Gang, we've already talked about them, and the Irgun Gang, they attacked the village of Deir Yassin and they massacred 250 people. When King Abdullah, when he hears about it, he invades Israel with his Arab legion. And that's when he attacks. And of the 750,000 Palestinians that fled to neighboring countries, the ones that went to Jordan, Abdullah granted them citizenship with equal rights. Now, I want you to remember that. King Abdullah let them in his country in 1948. And I want you to watch this pattern, what he does. What he does, you'll see his grandson do, and you'll see his great-grandson do as well. And this is a pattern, and this is one of the things that I think makes Jordan so great in my mind, in my eyes. Well, the Arab, I should back up, the Arab Legion of Jordan, they held the West Bank of Palestine in the 1948 war. And once an armistice was signed in 1949, the UN will allocate that whole West Bank area to Jordan. Israel now occupies that area right now, and in fact, Netanyahu is throwing out the idea of annexing it here, and if he does, that is going to, in fact, King Abdullah of Jordan has already said that is unacceptable, and so that's going to cause a lot of problems, but that's for another lesson. But prior to this, King Abdullah changed the name of Transjordan, as I mentioned. It was really, I said 1949, but he actually changed it on May 25th, 1946. So in 1950, Jordan will annex the West Bank, and then something terrible happens right here.
In Amman, capital of the Jordan, there is mourning in the palace and great sorrow in the hearts of the people. The king who made them a nation is no more. In the great Arab revolt, King Abdullah fought alongside Lawrence. He learned to love Britain, and in these days of trial, he was our friend. For this, he died. To the old city of Jerusalem, King Abdullah went for the Friday prayers. Among his own people, he walked unguarded and unafraid. But there were those who hated him, and as the king entered the mosque to pray, A young fanatic killed the one man who might have brought peace to the Middle East.
King Abdullah, I just want to say one thing, just really quick. That King Abdullah is a descendant of Muhammad. They are of the Hashemite kingdom, which gives them legitimacy in the eyes of many, many Arabs. And I think that's important. And so 1951, Abdullah dies. And by the way, when he dies, when he's assassinated, I put here his son, it's actually his grandson. The assassin was a member of the Jihad Muqaddas, and he shot Hussein in the head. And then his grandson, Hussein, is by his side, 15 years old. The guy on the left, he chases the murderer. He opens fire on him. And according to the palace sources, a bullet bounced off his metal, pinned to his chest, and then a third bullet clipped his ear, and then the guards killed the assassin. And I want to say King Abdullah in his autobiography, says the same thing. Well, after King Abdullah dies, he makes the oldest son, his son, Talal, the next king, because the Constitution stated that the succession should pass to the oldest son. But Talal didn't rule very long because he suffered from schizophrenia. And so he steps down from his kingship, and then his son, King Hussein, the one who chased the assassins who killed his grandfather, King Hussein will become the next king at 19 years old. And thank goodness, because of all the great things that King Hussein did. So 1960 war with Israel. We've already talked about that, talked about reasons why and what happened. King Abdullah, remember that, again, I'm going back to the present day king who's alive today and married to Queen Rania, who you saw videos on already. He said that he remembered the war beginning the 1964. It began when he said, I was 5 years old. And he remembers Israeli jets attacked Palestine guerrillas outside of Salt. Salt's a little town that's about 15 miles northwest of Amman. And he said, that evening my father came home and I just followed him into his room. And he said, I could see his eyes were damp. That was one of the very few times I ever saw my father cry. And there's little King Abdullah as a little boy, cute little boy there, isn't he? Him and his brother. So during the war, a lot of family came over to the house. They were all living down in the basement, probably in a bomb shelter, trying to be protected because there was just bombings going off everywhere. The palace was being bombed in different places and all over in Amman. And he said, my brother and I, Faisal, he says, we were playing and my brother challenged me to, we snuck up to the ground level floor and we looked out the window and he dared me to run out in the front yard, run to the fence, touch it and come back. And he said, I said, I'll do it. Because he's kind of King Abdullah is quite an adventurer, as you'll see in a minute. So he charges to the fence, and no sooner than he got to the fence, he said there was a huge explosion. He said, I burst into tears. I ran back into the house and never to run outside again. But he wasn't hurt. So the Jordanian, in the 1967 war, the Jordanian armed forces were devastated. 700 were killed, 6,000 wounded, all tanks, all air force completely destroyed. And one of the greatest tragedies for Jordanians, especially for King Hussein, was that they lost East Jerusalem. They lost this spot right here that is very sacred, not only to the Jews, but also that mount up above where the Dome of the Rock and Al-Aqsa Mosque is. That is very sacred, and they will lose control of that. Now, they do have some control of it today, and they, so they've worked out an agreement with Israel, but again, they had all of that. They had all of East Jerusalem, the old city, but that just devastated King Hussein. That would make him weep. Well, in the fray, there's this guy named Yasser Arafat in between all this. He was a Palestinian, born in Egypt, lived in Kuwait. He moved to Jordan in the 1960s, and he organizes what's called the PLO. I know you've heard of it. Palestinian Liberation Organization. And he starts to launch attacks on Israel with support, financial support from Egypt with the Fedayeen and the PLO. And the Israelis will launch back at the Battle of Kerama. And the Jordanians actually won the battle. In fact, this is the first Israel defeat against an Arab army when the Jordanians fight back. And Arafat and his guerrillas, what's interesting is they will claim the credit, but it was actually the Jordanian army. So remember, Yasser Arafat, he moves into Jordan and will try to take it over. And when the Jordanians win that battle with the Israelis, that's Yasser Arafat stands up and says, we did this. And he will become a hero because of it. And he'll try to take over Jordan. He'll break laws. He'll seek to establish a state within a state that the PLO are in charge of. And then, so we'll come back to him in just a second. But so let's talk a little bit about some other things between the 1950s and 1960s. I want to talk about King Hussein. So King Hussein, remember, he's the one that chases the assassins that kill his great-grandfather when they are up by Al-Aqsa Mosque. He was very vulnerable. This was a time of Arab nationalism. And because he was friends with the West, because he was educated in Britain, a lot of the extremists hated him. And there were revolutionary Nazarites in Egypt, and there were secular Baptists in Syria and Iraq that hated him. And they had grand visions of Arab unity, and they wanted to dominate. So Syria wants to dominate the Middle East. Nasser in Egypt wants to dominate the Middle East. And there were 18 documented assassination attempts against Hussein. And the assassins were working for Nasser of Egypt and some say for the Soviet Union. And because Hussein was a friend to the West, trained in the UK, and like the United States, he was a target. In fact, there was one source that said there were 18 assassination attempts. And King Abdullah, the present-day king, he says that my father, I want to say he said that he was killed, and he names a couple of different ways that people tried to kill him. There were at least 18 documented attempts against him. And so, yeah, and someone, because he suffered from sinus problems, he would use the saline solution and put it in his nasal cavity with nose drops. And someone with access got into his bathroom and exchanged a saline solution with hydrochloric acid. And by accident, the container fell down into the sink, and then the enamel began steaming, and they realized that that was a close call. He almost was killed in a very horrific way. And then King Abdullah, present-day king, I keep saying that because I know there's a lot of kings here, but I want you to, King Abdullah II, actually, is the full title. His Majesty, I should probably say. But he says, my father noticed that dead cats began to litter the palace grounds. It's like, what's going on? There's dead cats everywhere. And he found out that an assistant chef in the palace hired to kill Hussein was practicing poison on the cats. And King Abdullah II said, he is a very good cook, but a poor prisoner. I want to show you this video clip that's an interview with King Hussein as he talks about one of the attempts on his life. He was ambushed when his car and him and a couple of a general and a couple of others were leaving the palace, and they were attacked by I think it was the PLO. The Fedayeen, the PLO is someone, and I want to say that's who it was. But they attack him, and this is what happens.
This growth of a state within a state until he virtually lost control.
And on a crossroad, where there was a military police checkpost, we found that one side of the road was closed, and the other side also was blocked by an army lorry. No one inside. We stopped, 2 cars ahead of me and mine. And at that precise moment, heavy machine gun fire opened up on us. The car in front of me immediately, the sergeant in it, and soldiers began to fall out. And it was coming our way. I was stunned for a little while and angered. And then I realized what had happened, so I jumped out of the vehicle and rolled into a ditch, and we fired back. The cars were turned round. I got back into the car and realized I'd lost my berry in the ditch, so I decided I'd go back and get it, and which I did.
Why?
I don't know, I just couldn't leave it there. And we left.
But you could have died going back for your berry.
I know, yeah, sound ridiculous, and it did afterwards, but that was the case.
Did you fear death at that moment?
No. And I've never feared death, really, in any of the many incidents that had occurred to me or dangers I passed through. There were moments, I must say, when one thought that was really the end, but in terms of fear, I don't think it was there.
Do you mean that you've never known fear?
No, I have known fear, a different kind of fear.
What sort of fear?
Fear of myself, a fear of failing the people who have faith in me, fear of not being able to live with myself as a result of letting them down in some way or another.
He says that he doesn't...
I'm going to pause right there. They ask his wife the question, did your husband, is that really true? Did he not fear death? And she's just point blank. She goes, no, he does not fear death. He had a lot, he's had so many near-death experiences. I kind of think he realized, in fact, he would even say in his biography that he felt like that Allah had preserved his life. He had a mission, he had a purpose and an objective. And so, yeah. In fact, in King Abdullah's biography, when he talks about his dad here, Hussein, he says that he actually yelled at those that tried to kill him. He said, shame on them. And he says, it seems kind of odd that my father would yell that under attack, but he had a strong sense of personal honor and believed those that attacked him were cowards. And Jordanians would often say that Hussein possessed baraka, and it means Allah's favor. Hussein, he refused. He was like Captain Teflon, man. Just anything that hit him, it just slid off, you know. Hussein refused to be deterred by the attacks. And if anything, they increased probably his appetite for a kind of a risky life. He raced cars, he flew helicopters, he would get into fighter jets, as you can see here. Once, famously, while entertaining Henry Kissinger, he had taken the former U.S. Secretary of State and his wife on a kind of a gut-churning chopper tour of the country, and they were zipping across Jordan's rolling terrain, you know, up through the valley there in the city of Amman and all over. And as the helicopter skids, they were shaving the top of the palm trees. And Kissinger later recalls, he says, my wife tried politely to ask the king to clap. That's a terrible Kissinger voice. Okay, I know it is. But he said that my wife asked politely, please go to a safer altitude. And she goes, I didn't know helicopters could fly so low. And then the king said, oh, they can fly lower. So he flies down lower and he drops below treetop level and he starts skimming along the ground. And Kissinger said that really aged me quickly. So in choosing King Abdullah, his son, that's his son on the left and on the right, and Queen Rania, he really picked a leader that resembled him, at least in that respect, because the prince's reputation, King Abdullah, who's now King Abdullah, he also is a daredevil. In fact, he nearly scuttled his courtship with Queen Rania. Queen Rania Al-Yassin is her full name, before it really even started, because she was 22-year-old, stylish, beautiful marketing employee for Apple Incorporation. And then they meet at this dinner party, and Abdullah, he's just smitten. And Rania, she kind of shuns his advances. And he was, King Abdullah was 30 years old, Prince, I say Prince at the time. Prince Abdullah was 30 years old. He was an armored battalion commander, in fact, he's very sunburned when he met her because he'd been out in the field. And apparently he had kind of a bad boy reputation, kind of a rough guy. And here's Rania, the daughter of this middle-class Palestinian parents. Her dad's a dentist. She had no interest in being his latest conquest. And as King Abdullah would acknowledge later in his memoirs. And the way he won her over is one of her weaknesses is chocolate, especially dark chocolate. And so he sends her a box of chocolates and asked if she would go on a date. She comes to his house. He actually cooked her a teppanyaki dinner, Japanese dinner for her at his house. He loves to cook. That's how he unwinds. And she was very impressed by that. And, well, they weren't married. It wasn't much longer that they were married. Well, so let's go to 1970. Remember the Israelites retaliate in 1968 against the Palestinian Liberation Organization. Well, that's when all these groups start to, and by the way, I said it was the PLO that attacked Hussein in his car, but it might have been the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine, and I'm not sure, honestly. I forget. I could easily find that, but I forget. But in 1970, the PFLP, they'll hijack 3 airliners, and they'll eventually let the passengers go. Then they blow up the planes, and then 2 days later, the PLO establish a national authority in Jordan, trying to make a state within a state. Yasser Arafat says, "I'm in control here." And that was the final straw for Hussein, King Hussein of Jordan. 8 days later, he ordered the Jordan army to attack the Fedayeen. That's those that were the terrorists that were in Jordan that were under the PLO and the PFLP. He says they ordered it. They attack them. They have this little civil war. And one interesting thing is Arafat will escape dressed like a woman. At least that's what we think. That's what his aides thought, and that's what Hussein thought as well. See, Arafat was hiding in the Egyptian embassy in Amman, which was hosting a delegation from Egypt. And as the delegation left, there was an extra member, a stocky. They knew how many people went in, how many people were leaving. And this stocky woman dressed wearing an abaya and a headscarf walked with them. And the intelligence officers quickly went to Hussein before they got to the airport and said, "There's this mystery woman who we think is Arafat." And according to King Abdullah in his autobiography, he said, "My father told his men, just let Arafat leave Jordan." Why? Because King Abdullah said, and I quote him, "My father always believed that it was important to leave open the possibility of reconciliation." So, and by the way, King Hussein there on the left will save Yasser Arafat's life 20 years later when his plane crashed in the Libyan desert in a sandstorm. And then he'll send Arafat to the hospital in Jordan, and they'll find a blood clot in his brain. Well, in 1972, after 10 years of marriage, King Abdullah said, my dad, King Hussein, and my mom, Queen Muna, they divorced. And he had, by the way, there were two sisters from this, 2 daughters from this marriage, Aisha and Zayn, and a brother named Faisal. So after they divorced, I don't know why they divorced. King Abdullah doesn't talk about it in his autobiography. But King Hussein, Queen Aliyah marry, and they'll have a daughter. Queen Aliyah is the daughter of a Jordanian diplomat. She's killed in a helicopter accident in 1977. But later, in 1980, there was a young woman from, I want to say she was from San Diego. I know she's from California. She's American, Palestinian. Her roots are in Palestine. And she comes to Jordan, and she meets King Hussein. They fall in love, and they get married. And so, yeah. And then in 1990, the Gulf War starts. And then 1993, King Abdullah, that's when he gives chocolates to Queen Rania. And that's when they marry. I want to say they met in the fall. And then they marry, I want to say it was like, I forget. But that's not important. What's important, though, is Queen Rania is an absolutely amazing queen. She is brilliant. And so I wanted you to watch that interview that she had, and I wanted you to share with me what's your impression of her. And one of the things that impresses me, and I want to say it was, oh gosh, I forget the interviewer's name. But anyway, one of the things she says that's really impressive, she says, education has been my shield, my sword, my olive branch. Very profound. In fact, Queen Rania is educated at the American University in Cairo, and as you could tell by the interview, she's very articulate in English. One of the other things she said in the interview that was impressive, she says, suspicion, mistrust, and intolerance are driving us apart, meaning us as a world. We're stronger when we listen and smarter when we share. And I wanted to let you listen to, there's a lot of interviews that she had, and I want to just listen to this one little clip where she talks about, she makes this commentary on ISIS.
You know, they are operating under the false banner of Islam. They are nothing to do with faith and everything to do with fanaticism. And we have to stand up and confront them. I think to confront them, we have to identify the enemy. And the enemy are the extremists. They are our collective enemy. But that's not what they want us to think. They want to pit the West against Islam and Muslims against the rest of the world. Because for them, the more the world is divided, the more there's a chasm and a distance between us, the more space they have to maneuver and the more ground they gain. So I think we really need to redraw the battle lines and understand that this is a battle among all of us, Christians, Muslims, Jews, against the extremists. All of us moderates who are fighting for our way of life and our values against a group of people. And this is the first time in history, you know, throughout history there have always been terrorist groups, and they've always had a fixed or defined mission or objective or purpose. This group's purpose is to destroy all of the civilized world. So they're against the entire civilized world. That's never really happened before. It's never happened before where you had such a group of non-homogeneous members. You know, they come from different nationalities, they speak different languages, they come for different reasons. The only thing that unites them is hate and violence. And it's the first time that you have a group that actually can pop up in different geographic areas. They're not contained within one country. So right now they're in Asia, Africa, they could grow and pop up somewhere else. So, so I think understanding where we draw the line, that it's all of us against them, understanding that this is a really insidious enemy and that we have to confront them in every which way.
I've watched her and King Abdullah in many interviews, and they are very bright, very articulate, very insightful. Let's talk a little bit about King Abdullah II. This is the guy I keep referring to. He is the present-day king, born in 1962, makes him 2 years older than me. And it's funny, his wife, Queen Rania, is 1 year younger than my wife. So this is a picture of King Abdullah getting into a tank. He did not know that this would foreshadow really a big part of his life. He wasn't supposed to be the king. And by the way, he writes in his autobiography, this didn't happen. It wasn't until the last minute that they made him king. So he grows up thinking that someone else is going to be the king. And he says, I'm so grateful because it helped me to live a normal life. And so he'll go to Eagle Brook School in Deerfield, Massachusetts when he's 10 years old. And he was the first Arab to attend Eagle Brook School. And by the way, look, it has a ski resort right next to it. Nice school to go to, very expensive school. It was interesting, he said some Jewish students let him know that he wasn't welcome there. And he said, I didn't understand their animosity because, he said, I was too young to understand prejudice. And he said, I knew Jordanians and Israelis were enemies. He said, but we were in the United States, even in Massachusetts. He said, I could not escape the conflict of the Middle East. In fact, he had a little run-in with one of the boys. He said one afternoon, one of the proctors are the older students responsible for kind of keeping discipline. He said they kicked my brother Faisal out of the room, who I roomed with, and then they pulled in an older, bigger kid to fight Abdullah. He said, I jumped at the jump. I was like, okay. He said, in fact, he literally jumped. He says, I jumped on a bed and I leaped on the boy after he had first attacked me. He said, and we just started hitting each other on the back. We just kind of bear hugged and then hit each other on the back. He says, and then I jumped up on the bed and I knocked him to the ground. He says, and the kid hit his head. And then the proctors took him away. And he said it was completely by chance that it knocked him out. But because he was much bigger than me, he said the older kids began to show me more respect. As I read the biography, I don't think he really liked that school, his experience there as much. But then in high school, they sent him to Deerfield Academy in Massachusetts. He said they were the happiest years of my life, some of that most happy. He said they were dedicated to high academic standards, but they had a personal development program. The atmosphere was genuine respect, tolerance, strong sense of community. They would influence, he said that really would influence how I would view all countries in the future. He'll get on the wrestling team there. He'll become very close to an Italian kid named George, and he loved going to George's house because his mom would make lasagna. Well, eventually he went to the Royal Military Academy in England. After high school, he'll go to Pembroke College in Oxford. He'll study international relations. That will be very important. Little did he know he would become the king. He still doesn't know he's going to become the king yet. So he decides, I want to be a professional soldier. He really loved fighting and training to be a fighter. He went into the Special Forces unit. He went back to America, learned to fly Apache attack helicopters. And his years in the military really will serve him well because he will help the U.S. and the Allies battle ISIS in Syria and Iraq. And as I mentioned, King Abdullah, he was an adrenaline junkie like his dad. But within weeks of becoming king, this brash Italian commander who had plunged from airplanes hundreds of times, he really began to quickly rule Jordan well. In fact, Joby Warwick in his Black Flags book said he invited Israel's prime minister. Well, he said he traveled to Saudi Arabia and other Gulf Emirates, tried to patch a decade rift that because Jordan remained neutral during the Gulf War. And then he invited Israel's prime minister, Netanyahu, to get acquainted at a luncheon. That probably didn't go very well. He even tried to improve ties with Syria. He reached out first to President Hafez al-Assad and later befriended Bashar al-Assad when he became the president of Syria. Now, one of the questions I asked you is I had you watch that cool 10-minute video that the tour industry there made for Jordan. And I said, what intrigues you the most? I wish we were in class together. You could tell me what was so interesting. And I would suspect one of the most fascinating things for you and everybody else is Petra. Petra is amazing. By the way, so my wife and I were there last spring. And if you look at this so these are like carved out. The Nabateans are the ones that carved these out, even before Jesus was born, like I want to say 200 BC. But do you see on both sides, there's like these little holes that go up, two sets of holes. So what they did is they actually made those holes first, and then they got to the very top and started to carve out the limestone downwards. They worked downwards so they wouldn't have to build any scaffolding. So they'd climb all the way up to the top and then slowly work their way down. Isn't that interesting? So so my wife and I just, as I mentioned, we went to Jordan last spring, and there was a camel just walking across the road. I couldn't get it. It's kind of a grainy picture, but it was just cool out of nowhere. And when we first got there, we went to Aqaba, which was one of my favorite parts because I was very sick on this trip, and so I didn't get in the water, but everybody else in our group did. And we took a boat, chartered a boat, went out in the water. It was so beautiful. And we had been really working hard on this tour trip, and from early morning till late at night every day. So this was such a nice break for all of us. I really enjoyed it. And by the way, there was jellyfish all over out there, and for some reason it was either the season they don't sting or they were non-stinging jellyfish. I can't remember. I just remember everybody was around them. Maybe that's why I stayed. So yeah, and the guys on the boat, man, they were awesome. This is the meal they fed us. They cooked out a little barbecue grill right off on the back of the boat. It was it tasted so good. And this is from our hotel in Aqaba. My wife got up in the morning and went jogging. And then this right here, so this is cool. This is where the movie Martian was filmed. And so I just did a quick frame little tour. By the way, looks like it would be really hot and warm, but we were freezing to death. This is in the spring. I didn't know Jordan got so cold. I was absolutely frozen by the time we got to point A to point B. And this is a picture I took just because I thought this really looks cool. And then of course another time frame here, speed up. You know, this one makes me kind of dizzy, but I just wanted you to see what it looked like a little bit. So yeah, just a really beautiful area. This is me standing in front of the camels. Didn't ride any of them, but I sure liked them. I love camels. And it's just a really fascinating place. And it's all, you know, I just finished reading a book called Married to a Bedouin by Marguerite's last hard name to pronounce. Fascinating book. She and her husband, she goes here on backpacking trip. She's from Australia or New Zealand. And there's my wife right there. And she meets this Bedouin. And all the Bedouins lived, the Bedouins that ran Petra, they all lived in the caves. And she lived in the caves. They're now up at Wadi Musa, the little village, because they were kind of transplanted because they wanted more place for the tourists. But they lived in these little caves. And so I wanted to show you inside of that cave. By the way, I love that book. Fascinating book to read. Because, and by the way, these Bedouins, this tribe has lived in this area forever, and they go there during the day. So they used to live there, but now they live in Wadi Musa, and then they walk to Petra, and they have their little booths all over, and they sell things. And this Bedouin woman was up on top of the mountain. I was amazed. I'm like, I was having a hard time getting to the top because I was so sick. But I walked up there, and I'm like, how did you get up here? She's amazing. And she's got a little cash in her hand, a cigarette there, you can see. So kind of fun to see the cars parked. And by the way, I want you to put an arrow to those people to give you an idea how big these places were. These cliff dwellings went for miles, and there were plenty of places for these Bedouins to live at one time. And this is where we stayed in Wadi Musa. I just wanted to show you a film clip of it. It's beautiful.
This is where we're going to dinner.
Stayed at. It was gorgeous. What I wanted to show you there was, let me pause that really quick. So that is, my wife and I, we went to Amman and stayed a couple extra days. Our group went back to the United States, and she and I stayed because I really wanted to see Amman. And this was from our Airbnb, and this vegetable truck came by. I just thought it was so interesting. It was like an ice cream truck in America with, you know, when I was a little kid, ice cream truck would come by with music playing. But there, it's a vegetable truck. But not only a vegetable truck, yeah, so a propane truck. So this is some pictures I took. We went to the Amman citadel called the Jabal al-Qala. It's a very historical site. It's in the center of downtown Amman. In fact, we were within walking distance of it. It's right there in the capital of Jordan. And most of the buildings are still visible at the site. And they date back to Roman, Byzantine, the Umayyad period. And just give you a little clip here, a little shot. You can see the old city of Amman in the background. My wife and I were up on a little hillside. Our Airbnb was. There's my wife again. There's the Roman theater. Then we went to a mosque, and this is the Qibla. Remember the Qibla? Qibla means direction in Arabic, and it just, in the mosque, it tells you which way to... in fact, did I miss it? I guess I missed a picture. of the mosque. Maybe I show it at the end here. But outside the mosque, there were these, I think they were wudu fountains, watering fountains to cleanse the parts of the body. Kind of they always go through a ritual purification or ablution before prayer. And so, yeah, here's my wife. She needed to wear the hijab before we went into the mosque. So, yeah, there is the blue mosque. Well, I love Jordan. So in 1994, Yitzhak Rabin and Hussein and Clinton, they signed what's called the Washington Declaration on 25th of July, 1994. And it basically just said, Israel and Jordan, we now end, they ended the official state of enmity. They start negotiations in order to kind of achieve the end to the bloodshed and sorrow. And because of this peace treaty is why my wife and I got to go there last spring. Here's the actual signing of the peace treaty.
Today, King Hussein and Prime Minister Rabin give their people a new currency of hope and the chance to prosper in a region of peace.
Okay, well, you get the idea. So Abdullah, he said, so this is King Hussein and Yitzhak Rabin. And Abdullah, in his autobiography, he said, over time, my father and Rabin had become very close. They were both military men. They were heavy smokers. And once my father found that Rabin smoked almost as he did, they were always passing cigarettes back and forth. So that's kind of an endearing moment there for them. And then Rabin is assassinated a year later after he signed the peace treaty in 1995 by a Jewish extremist while attending, of all things, a peace rally in Tel Aviv. Abdullah said that my dad, Hussein, said, my father believed if Rabin lived longer, they would have made greater strides together in bringing about a comprehensive Arab-Israeli settlement. So sad that he didn't live longer to see what would have happened. Well, so he signs the peace treaty, and then in 2005, it was a normal Muslim wedding. People were clapping as the bride and groom prepared to make their entrance into the ballroom. It was at Amman's Radisson Hotel, all fixed up like a desert carnival. It was in the mid-November. It would have been cool evening. The newlyweds' father, all grins and rented tuxedos. They'd taken their places at the podium as the Arabic band and the woodwinds and the drums started to play and get louder and louder and louder. And no one would have noticed that there were two figures that snuck in the back in dark coats that kind of shuffled in stealthily in the room. And then all of a sudden there was a blinding flash, and then the sensation of everything falling, the ceiling, the walls, the floor. And Joby Warwick, in his book, Black Flags, that I read, it's all about the father of ISIS, Al-Zarqawi. He said the shockwave knocked guests out of their beds on the hotel in the upper floors. It blew out thick plate glass in the doors of the lobby. Hundreds of steel ball bearings carefully, densely packed around the bomb's core. The bomb it was wrapped around the people's body, and then they had those little steel balls all over the bomb so if the explosive didn't do enough damage, the flying ball bearings would. And they just sliced through decorations, food trays, upholstery. They splintered wood tables, shattered the marble tiles. They tore through people's evening gowns, suit jackets, crisp shirts through white. And I'm quoting Joby Warwick, how he describes it, does a great job. The frilly dresses of kind young girls, and he names two girls that died. Lena, 9 years old, and Riyam, 14 years old. Abu Haytham, he's the Mukhabarat. Mukhabarat is kind of Jordan's version of the FBI. He goes to the hospital and he sees these two little girls, Lena and Ritham, and he said, they look like little angels. Their faces were unmarred, but he said, I hope their eyes were closed. He said, I hope they're asleep. I hope they're asleep. Hope they're asleep. But their bodies, he looks down, and their bodies were just peppered with shrapnel, and they both were dead. He said it was the saddest thing. And he went on an all-out manhunt for the person who did this. And we're going to talk about that guy in just about 30 seconds. There was another bombing also at the same time at the Grand Hyatt and another hotel, I don't know the name. About 60 people are killed. This is the one, when I said 2 people shuffled in stealthily into the room, this is one of them. Her name is Al-Zarqawi. She was a failed suicide bomber. She conspired with her husband to wear bomb belt packs with ball bearings. This is what she said. There was a wedding with children, women and men inside. My husband detonated his bomb. I tried to explode my belt, but it wouldn't, and people fled, and I ran with them. So she runs out. They eventually catch her. And there's the bride, the groom, Mohammed, on the right, and Nadia, his bride. And that's both their dads posing with them. And those 2 dads were, when they seated up at the balcony, they both were killed instantly. And of course, who's the man responsible? It's this man, Al-Zarqawi. His real name is Ahmad. He will rename himself after the town he came from in Jordan, Zarqawi, because that's what a lot of the terrorists did. And he would eventually create today what we now call ISIS. And he grew up as a hoodlum, a thug in high school, dropout. He had a reputation as a heavy drinker, a fighter. And then he wanders off to Afghanistan in the 1980s to fight the communists. And he returns as a very battle-hardened religious fanatic. And in the book Black Flags, Joby says, I think he's the father of of ISIS. And so after the 2003 war with Iraq, really, by going in and taking out the infrastructure of the government, the police, everything, we really made a big mistake and created this political vacuum for Zarqawi to come into the fray. And he pushed Iraq to the very brink of sectarian war. He unleashed wave after wave of savage attacks on the Shiites, of the civilians, and their mosques, their bazaar schools. So he's a Sunni. Most Jordanians are Sunni. And he just horrified millions with this new form of intimate terrorism, beheading of individual hostages, capturing them on video, sending it around the world. He used the internet to broadcast directly to people's homes. Well, the United States Army pursued him all over Iraq, trying to find Zarqawi. And they finally do, thanks to, remember I talked about the FBI, the Mukhabarat guy, I think his name is Abu. And they're the ones that give the intelligence to finally take out Zarqawi. And I'll just show you this little video clip here.
On February 22, 2006, Zarqawi's branch of Al-Qaeda attacked one of the holiest sites in Shia Islam, the Golden Mosque in Samarra. The Shia, who are the majority sect in Iraq, decided to fight back.
Violence is spreading in Iraq, a day after one of Shiite Islam's holiest shrines was attacked.
Zarqawi had long sought to spark a civil war. Now he had. His confidence high, he released a video that revealed his face for the first time.
We captured it. It was clearly a propaganda film. He was the visionary leader and he was the communicator for it. He was many things wrapped up into one, and he was a psychopathic killer. We didn't know where he was. But by that time, even amongst ourselves, we said, we're gonna get him.
On June 7th, 2006, a JSOC officer monitoring a feed from a drone spotted one of Zarqawi's advisors behaving suspiciously.
In the course of an afternoon, he left his house in Baghdad, did a number of things, did a number of what we call counter-surveillance techniques, switching vehicles. And then as soon as he got to this dwelling and drove up the driveway to this house, a guy came out and met him, dressed in all black, which was Abu Zarqawi's signature look, the Johnny Cash look, and he came to the end of this driveway. He looked left and right to see if anybody was there, and he turned and walked back. And when we saw that, we said, that's it. He's there. That's Zarqawi. And then the ground force commander says, okay, we're going to drop a bomb. So
he was alive when they got there, and then he died from the impact not much longer after that. Well, I'd had you watch a video on King Abdullah, and I was very impressed with the video. And, you know, one of the things that was impressive about the interview, he's very articulate, he's a very smart man, good man. And there were already 2 million Palestinians that took refuge in Jordan because his dad, King Hussein, let him in after the 1967 war. And remember, King Hussein's grandfather, King Abdullah, let the Palestinians in after the 1948 war. So now here's this pattern, this wonderful pattern that's been passed down. He's now let 1.5 million Syrians come in because of the Syrian war. And they will make up 10% of the Jordanians, and really hurt them bad. But they still they hurt the infrastructure. They hurt them economically, but they still let them in. So 2012, Syrian refugees flooding in, and then that's when ISIS burned the Jordanian pilot in front of the whole world, set him on fire in a cage, and that's when the Jordanians just launched an all-out offensive against ISIS. And in fact, when King Abdullah heard about it, he said, "I will drop every bomb that we have until we wipe them out." Well, I want to end with this. In Ezekiel 47, it says in verses 3 through 4, it says, makes a prophecy that I think is significant to Jordan. It says that water would issue out, verse 1, from under the threshold of the house eastward, for the forefront of the house stood toward the east. And it says, and then the waters came out, and in fact, the waters will come out of basically, Ezekiel is saying that water will flow out of the Temple Mount into the Kidron Valley. In fact, they're going to flow into the Dead Sea. And so right here is, I wish I had a better picture here. I lost the picture. But I wanted to show you how the water flowed all the way down the Kidron Valley. Well, actually, that is number 18 right there is Jerusalem. So you can see where the water flows out. It heals the Dead Sea. And I want you to hear Elder Renlund tell this story.
47.
Afterward, he, an angel, brought me, Ezekiel, again unto the door of the house of the Lord. And behold, waters issued out from under the threshold of the house eastward. For the forefront of the house stood toward the east, and the waters came down from the right side of the house, at the south side of the altar. And when the man that had the line in his hand went forth eastward, he measured 1,000 cubits, and he brought me through the waters. The waters were to the ankles. Again he measured 1,000, and brought me through the waters. The waters were to the knees. Again he measured 1,000, and brought me through. The waters were to the loins. Afterward he measured 1,000, and it was a river that I could not pass over, for the waters were risen, waters to swim in, a river that could not be passed over.
Then said he unto me, These waters issue out toward the east country, and go down into the desert, and go into the sea, which being brought forth into the sea, the waters shall be healed. And it shall come to pass that everything that liveth, which moveth, whithersoever the river shall come, shall live.
I'm going to stop right there. That phrase in verse 9, whithersoever the rivers shall come, shall live. You know, this is the Negev desert where the Dead Sea is that's going to be healed. And I should back up and just say, on the west side is Israel, on the east side is Jordan. In fact, they've divided I want to say the borderline goes right down the
47
middle of the sea. And I just want to close with saying, you know, when it says, wherever the river comes, it shall live. Jesus said to the woman of the well, whosoever drinketh the water that I shall give him shall shall never thirst. This water that flows out of the house of the Lord, that flows ultimately from the Lord Jesus Christ. It says it will flow. And I know this is, we don't know if this is literal or metaphorical or both, but it says in verse 12 that by the river upon the bank thereof, on the side and on that side, meaning both sides, the Jordanian side, the Israeli side, the water shall be trees. It'll create trees for meat, and the leaf shall not fade. Shall the fruit thereof shall not be consumed, and the fruit thereof shall be for meat, and the leaf thereof shall be for medicine. Well, many times you'll find many places in the scriptures where people are compared to trees. I believe when King Hussein and King Abdullah let those refugees in, and their father Abdullah, also Abdullah the first and Abdullah the second, when they let those refugees in, they became trees of shade, trees of meat, trees for medicine. When Queen Rania became an advocate for education, health, community empowerment, youth, cross-cultural dialogue, microfinance, she became a tree that gave life. These leaders in Jordan are doing all that they can to reach out and do what their fathers did. And I just know that Heavenly Father looks down on them, and he loves them, and he cares for them, and he blesses them. No wonder he kept Hussein alive for so long. And so I am so grateful to be able to teach you about these wonderful people. It's my dream that I would get to have lunch with King Abdullah and Queen Rania someday. I don't think that's going to happen. But I got to go to their state, their country, and be near them, and be near these wonderful people and live among them for a couple of days. But I know God lives. I know that he loves these people, and I say that in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.